Hi, I'm Julian Grimm, and today I ran too fast and now my legs hurt. You know, I talked about mixing before in this channel. Specifically, I talked about how you could record and mix a whole song just using Ableton sounds and Ableton plugins. Today we're gonna take a step forward. Some of you guys might know that I have a band called Snap Out, and we have real humans in this band, and sometimes we go into real rooms and we record real drums and real amps and real people inside a room. On this particular recording, we have a very limited time to get this done because Leia, who was the drummer in the band at the time, had to deliver this song for his music course quite quickly. So we only had one afternoon and we stayed, I think, in the studio for about 4 hours. We never heard this song before. He wrote this song, yes. My band let the drummer write a song, which is crazy. But he wrote the song, he recorded on his phone, and we listened to the phone recording, and then we went through the song with him a couple of times, and we just did it there. 4 hours, never heard the song. We didn't play it together that day. Everybody went one by one into the live room and recorded their part. And I gotta admit, there's something magical about that, you know? There are many bands that used to do that in the past, when you went into a studio and you had a limited time, and you just had to come out with a song or with an album, and there's something really magical about that. But the situation is not ideal. Sometimes the room's not the best, sometimes the drums are not the best, the amps are not the best, the microphones are not the best, sometimes the humans are not feeling the best. So we're gonna go through this real world recording that's not ideal. We're gonna mix it using just Ableton Live plugins again, and I'm gonna go part by part showing you guys how I got the final sound. So this is how the final mix sound right now. Okay, so you guys have a nice idea how it sounds right there. Today we're gonna start with drums. So don't worry about it. I know some of you guys have been asking me to talk about vocals and guitars again. I will get there this week, so I'm gonna go through the whole mix. But let's just go in order, okay? So let's start with the drums. This is how the drums sound on their own mixed. This was a very cool thing because Leia, he's an amazing drummer. He's back in Brazil now, unfortunately, so he's not in the band anymore. We have a new drummer, of course, Glenn, which is also awesome. But Leia, he did about 3 takes. I think this is the second or the third take, and that was it. He was in and out. He's such a good drummer. We didn't comp the take at all. This is just the full take as it is, him playing there live. The things that I would have to say though is the room wasn't ideal and the drums weren't ideal. The room was very small, so I couldn't have enough distance from the cymbals as I usually like to. So the cymbals were quite annoying to me in the overheads. So let me show you how the overheads sound without any plugins on. As you can hear, there's a lot of cymbals there. So what I did, firstly, I cut all the lows out. When you're doing overheads, you don't need the low end usually. You want the low end to be dominated by the kick so the kick can punch on its own with the bass down there. If you leave the low end from your overheads, usually it just messes around with your kick. So I would recommend you to always cut the lows. I put a little bit of a boost around 200 here because I wanted a little bit more body from the drums because I thought the drums sounded quite thin, and also, as you can see, because of the cymbals, because they were annoying me so much, I cut around 8. I honestly don't miss that top end in this song for the cymbals. I also lowered a little bit around 5K here just because it was so annoying without it. So annoying. And for the compression, when it's overheads, you don't want to overcompress. You gotta preserve the natural sound of the drums a little bit and make them breathe and make them sound nice and open. So you don't want to compress the overheads too much. So it's just like a little bit of compression. And as you can see, it's not gonna do much to it. I left the attack not too fast as well because I don't want to kill the transients, and it's just a tiny touch of compression. So this is how it sounds with the plugins on. And now off. See how annoying those cymbals were? Now it's much better. And the drums have more body as well. It was just a tiny room. So one of the biggest disadvantages of recording drums in tiny rooms is that the cymbals get everywhere. It's annoying, but you can deal with it in the mix as you've seen. Now the kick. This is how the kick sounded before any mixing. See, that's actually quite a good kick sound. I don't mind it at all. Like, I just enhanced it a little bit. I cut a lot of the low end because, again, in punk rock, you don't need sub, okay? This is not pop music, this is not electronic music. You don't need super subby frequencies right there. It's gonna mess around with the speed and the flow of your song. A little bit of a boost here, just around 56. This is the area I would recommend boosting the low end of your kick, because after that becomes the area that the bass should occupy. So just boost around this area. As you heard, that was not really a boxy sound, so I didn't mess around with the boxiness of the kick. That's around here, 500. But I need a little bit more of attack from the beater, so a little bit of 1K. I hated how 2K sounded, so I left it down. And again, for a little bit more of a crispy kick, I added a little bit of 4K just because it made it a little bit more attacky. You need that attack on punk rock. You gotta have a pointy kick driving you forward, right? Compression again, nothing too crazy, just a little bit of compression. See? Not much there. Channel EQ is a more musical EQ that you can find in Ableton. It's not as precise as EQ8, but it's more musical. It sounds better. So I just use it to, again, boost a little bit of the low, a little bit of the high, put a little bit of the 2K back, but it's more of a musical 2K than this shady 2K that I had removed before here. That's how it sounded after the channel EQ. And the drum bus is actually a plugin that's meant for electronic drums in Ableton, but I like it to use on real drums as well, especially on the kick. I don't usually use it on the whole drum kit, but I do like to use it on the kick because you can add a little bit of drive, which is also nice because it gives more harmonics to your kick. And you can add a little bit of transients, but let me tell you about this transient knob right here. This is super, super delicate. Like, once you mess around with it, you're gonna wanna put it all the way up. It makes everything sound so much more aggressive. But once you hear it in the mix, if you exaggerate this knob right here, it ruins your sound. So let me just show you an example. This is how it sounds now. And if I exaggerate the transients, you might think that it sounds more aggressive and more pointy and you would want that, but no. Be careful. This is messing around with the natural sound of your kicks. So don't go overboard, you know, just a little bit. Just a little bit goes a long way. And again, I have the boom here. The boom is just a sub frequency. I know we don't usually add sub frequencies to the kick, but as you can see, I'm leaving it around 52, which is where, again, as I said when I was talking about the EQ, around 60 and 50 where you want to mess around with your low end for your kick. So I just added a bit of a fake low end because we only had one kick mic in that situation. Usually I would record with two kick mics, one being for the pointy sound of the beater and the other one would be farther away for the lower end of your kick. But because we just had one, I just added this cool plugin here, added a little bit of boom, and that kind of replaced what would be my kick out mic or my kick sub mic. So this is without the drum bus and this is with. Again, when you're messing around with the boom, don't go too crazy. I think I even went a little bit too crazy here. Be careful with the decay. If you leave the decay super long, it's gonna start sounding like a hip hop kick, going like an 808 would do, you know, like this. You don't want that. It's too long for a punk rock kick. Punk rock kicks have to be short and attacky, you know, like a chihuahua. Just short, angry, and just really eager to be part of your life. So there you go. Now this next thing, it's a cool trick that Ableton has up its sleeve. I know some people don't like to use samples. I don't like to use samples if I have an ideal recording situation. But again, we only had one kick mic and we only had a small room. And I wanted the kick to sound a little bit more open and natural. So I wanted to add a little bit of a roomy kick sound to my kick. And Ableton has this really cool feature. If you right click your clip and you go to convert drums to new MIDI track, it takes a little bit of a while, but it's worth it. You see, it creates this new track here, this crazy track with all this stuff. And that's because this is a real drum kit. So Ableton's listening to the other pieces of the drum leaking into your kick mic. So it's listening to the snare and the hi-hat, but you can just erase all of this. And then you have just the kick. Ableton defaults to a 606 kick. So as you can hear here, it's an electronic drum kick. So all that I did was I went to Splice. I found a kick that I liked, which was this one. Pretty roomy, pretty nice. And I just dragged it over there. See? That's it. And the other thing that I did was I chose all the kick hits. Because as you can see, Ableton figures out the velocity of each kick as well, which is awesome because that means it's kind of figuring out how your drummer played the kick and how strong each kick is. And it kind of tries to translate this into velocities, which it sounds more natural and cool. But because this is a reinforcement track, I want it to be strong all the time. So I just choose all the kicks and I drag all the velocities up. That way, every kick is consistent. And that summed up to the normal kick, which is less consistent, makes a stronger kick. I don't need, in this case, the nuances of the kick. This is a reinforcement track and it's gonna be low in the mix and I need it to be there, consistent throughout the whole track. The nuances of the kick is gonna be given by the real kick track. So that's what I did on this track right here called Sample. And as you can hear, it's just a sampled kick sound. If I zoom in, exactly where my drummer played his kicks. So now you have another kick track to reinforce your natural kick track, which is awesome that Ableton Live does this, because most of the times you would have to get a plugin like Slate Trigger or something like that to reinforce your drums. And then all that I did was I compressed it a little bit to get more of the room sound coming out. I had to invert the phase. Now this is a very important thing that you always have to do when you're dealing with drums. You always have to check the phase of your different drum pieces, especially the low pieces like the floor tom or the kick. Because when you add sounds on top of each other, if they're out of phase, they're gonna sound papery, flaky. I don't know how to describe it, but they sound wrong. And if I solo both kicks and play them without the flipped phase, you can hear this is how they sound together without flipping the phase. And now I'm gonna flip the phase. As you can hear, it's very, very subtle, but there's a little bit more low end. Usually when the phase is right, the low end is there and it doesn't sound thin and weird. That's how you know you're on the right path. Some people like to align things so everything is perfectly in phase. I'm okay with just flipping the phase and seeing which one sounds better. I also made the sample mono because I don't want any of the kicks going out to the stereo image of my track. I want the stereo to be just my guitars and the vocal effects. So the kicks fully mono, no kick on the sides. So this is how they sound together again. As you can see, the sample is way quieter than the normal kick because I want the normal kick to be the main kick, the real kick of the track. Let's go to the snare now. For the snare, we had two mics, which was nice because I always recommend recording a snare top and a snare bottom just because you need, you know, the rattle sound from the bottom just to give it a bit more of a shimmer to your snares, make it a bit more snarey because that's what makes a snare, the rattle on the bottom. So you need that sound. I also did the same thing that I did with the kick. Ableton converted it to MIDI. I chose a sample. I added it really quietly for the snare because our snare was quite good already. So for this snare, I just wanted a little bit of reinforcement. You know, that no velocity, nothing always there sound that we had in the kick. I wanted that to be right there in the bottom just to give our snare a little bit more strength, but nothing more than that. The actual sound from the snare is coming from our recorded snare. So this is our snare top. As you can hear, it's quite a ringy snare, which I love. Again, I cut all the low end. We don't need that for a snare, but I boosted around 200 because that's where the body of the snare starts showing up. And I like a thick snare. And a little bit around 3K because that's where the attacky and the aggressive part of the snare is. So I wanted that to be a little bit more heightened as well. I removed a little bit of the mid-range, right around 600, 500 here, because that's where the boxiness comes. And I didn't want any boxiness on my snare, so I removed it. And it also got rid of a little bit of excessive ring. I like a ringy snare, but it was a bit too much. So this is how the snare sounded before the EQ. This is after. A lot more body in there. You might be thinking that I'm missing a little bit of the top, but it comes back when I put the snare top in there, so don't worry. Compression again, nothing too crazy. I like to do just a little bit of compression with Ableton's compressor because it's not a compressor that has a sound. It's just a compressor. It's very transparent, if you know what I mean. It doesn't change your sound. It just does what it's meant to be. It just compresses it. So I do most of the heavy compression on the buses using the glue compressor, which has more of a sound, more saturation and all that stuff. So on each little section, I don't put too much compression in there. I just control the sound a little bit so it's a bit more together and a bit more consistent, but nothing too crazy. you always have the dry and wet knob here. So if you like the sound but you think it's a bit too harsh, put the dry sound a little bit in there again. It will sound cool. It's parallel compression in a way. So always remember you can do that in Ableton. Mix the original sound with the compressed sound. And the last plugin here is a cool trick called the OTT. Ableton has this plugin called a multiband compressor, right? And it comes with a preset called OTT, which I think it means over the top, but it might just be a rumor, I'm not sure. But it does sound super over the top. So I'm gonna turn it on and I'm gonna put the mix amount all the way up. And you're gonna hear how aggressive it sounds. That sounds crazy, like it completely ruined the sound, but it does bring kind of a weird energy, doesn't it? It brings something that wasn't there in the original sound, like a shimmer, an energy. It's weird. So you have the possibility to change the amount. So if I go back to the amount that I had before, this is how it sounds now. So you still get the energy from this crazy preset, but it's not completely screwing with your sound. So that's pretty cool. Always remember the OTT, because it's gonna appear again in our mix, okay? So don't worry, you're gonna get familiar with it. This is the snare bottom that we had. So for the snare bottom, I just put a little bit of EQ in there because I didn't want to go too crazy with compression, because I can bring leak from other drum pieces in there. So it's just a little bit of EQ. What's cool about snare bottoms is usually they're used for the high frequencies, right? So they have the rattly sound from your snare, but they're also pointing to the bottom of your snare. And there's loads of body in there. So usually for the snare bottoms, I boost, again, the body and the high end. This time I didn't actually boost the high end that much because it was already good from the recording. And again, cut the mids, boxy. You don't need that. Cut the lows again. Don't want to mess around with your kick. Simple. Mix it with the top mic and you have a full snare right there. So let's do that. It's just a snare top. And now with the bottom. Sounds like a snare now. Very snary, isn't it? Hashtag very snary. Okay. I don't think I've ever used a hashtag in my life until I started trying this YouTube channel, just because I think it might help. I don't know. I'm old, okay? I'm doing my best here with the social media stuff. So, and going back to the drums, here we have the sample that I chose for the snare. Very aggressive snare sound, very pointy, very attacky, but it's very quiet in the mix. It's just there to give a little bit of reinforcement to the snare. So let's hear without and with the sample. As you can hear, it adds a little bit of a room to the snare as well, because our room was so small, we didn't actually have any room sound. So it's nice to have it there. So for the toms, very important to remember to edit the fuck out of your toms, because especially in a small room where you don't have too much space to maneuver your mics, there's gonna be loads of leak from the cymbals and other pieces of your drum on the tom mics. So you wanna just leave the tom hits in there, okay? That's all you want to leave in there. So as you can see in my tracks, I cut everything that wasn't a tom hit from my tom tracks. And the rest is not too complicated. The mics already sounded good. So when you're EQing a tom, you're going to clearly see in the spectrum what its fundamental frequency is. I'm going to show you now. As you can see, is this frequency here that I boosted. That's the fundamental frequency of that tom. So boost it a little bit because it's nice, it's complementary, it's meant to be there. Took out a little bit of the boxiness in there. Added a little bit of high end to add a little bit of the stick sound hitting the toms. And that's it. It's the same exact thing for the floor tom. See, different fundamental frequency, but still the same idea. Not much compression. Don't worry about too much compression, but this is how the toms sound mixed and together. Sounds crazy because there's the cuts in there, but if you put it with the whole drums, this is how it sounds. Sounds pretty cool, right? And lastly, is that a word? Lastly? I don't know. I think it is. It should be. This is the sausage mic. The sausage mic is a trick I picked up from my friend Toby Pluta, which is also a very cool drummer. There are different ways to make a sausage mic. There's different positionings that you can take. Toby used to like to put it behind him, I think because that kind of gave him the sound that he hears when he's in the middle of the drums. I put it right in the middle of everything. So in between the snare and the kick and the toms, I put a mic right there and I compressed it on the way in. All of the drum pieces coming equally into this one little poor mic that was just being barraged with everything in it. So this is how it sounds. It's equally distant from all the pieces and it doesn't get too many cymbals in there as well, which is nice. I added some EQ because I needed to make it complementary to the rest of the drums. So I wanted some of the bottom end to make the drum sound thicker and help the kick out a little bit. I wanted a lot of the body, again, none of the boxiness and the annoyance of this mid-range right here. Not too much of the attack and nothing from the top, because the cymbals can get crazy. If you start getting cymbals on every mic of your drum kit, you're gonna have too much cymbals in your whole drum track. So I try to cut most of the cymbal high end right there because I don't like cymbals to be loud in my mixes. So this is without the EQ. This is with. It also helps to glue the drums together and make them all sound like they're in the same room. Like it's this one mic to glue them all, if you know what I'm saying. And that's it. That's how I mix the drums, piece by piece. And of course, when you're mixing drums, you have to put them all into a group. In Ableton Live, it's called a group. In other DAWs, it's called an aux or a bus or whatever. But it's the same concept. You have to route them into this one track. You have to fine tune your whole drum sound and just make it even better than it was just with each separate track being mixed. Let's go from the beginning. This is how the drums sound with no plugging on the bus. See, that's pretty good. I like it. But you could put a little bit more high end in there. I always cut the lows. I keep cutting the lows in multiple stages because sometimes plugins and saturation and all that stuff add lows back that you don't need. So I always cut a little bit of the lows just to make it safe because I don't want super low end in my punk rock mix, okay? And I added a little bit of highs to make it more shimmery and top endy and more glistening, okay? So this is how it sounds without the EQ and with the EQ. And look who's back, our friend OTT. Again, giving crazy energy. I'm gonna put it all the way up so you guys can hear how horrible it sounds. But we do want some of the energy, so we put the amount down. 3% even 3% makes a difference. So here's without the OTT. And here's with. Just a little bit of the energy right there in the bottom. Okay, and now here again we have one of my best friends in Ableton, audio effect rack. Parallel processing, very important in Ableton. You can do it in an audio effect rack. You just drag effects into this area here and they show up as parallel chains. So I have a clean chain, no effects at all, just the pure sound of the drums. This is the loudest chain. I have a saturation chain with saturated on it, which is my favorite Ableton saturation plugin. Maybe it's the only one. No, there's other ways to get saturation in Ableton, but this is my favorite saturation sound in Ableton Live. And it's lower than the clean, and it's lower than the pure drum sound up here. I can solo it so you guys can hear how it sounds on its own. This is the clean one. So we put it all the way down and we mix it back up, and this is how they sound together. See, adds harmonics to the drums, it makes it more aggressive, more chaotic, which is nice, I like it. And of course we have parallel compression, because if you're gonna do an audio effect rack to do parallel processing, you gotta do parallel compression, right? So we got the compressor here, going nuts, super high ratio, super fast attack, pumpy sound, crazy compression sound. You will never use it on its own, but when you leave it low in the mix, it glues everything together and it's awesome. So this is how it sounds on its own. This is how the drum sounds without it. This is how the drum sounds with it. I As you can hear, it's very subtle again because it's very low in the mix, but I think it brings everything together and it doesn't ruin the sound. So it's quite nice. Parallel compression on drums, always. And lastly, after the audio effect rack, I have a glue compressor just to tighten the drums a little bit more, make them a little bit more together, more controlled, and just give them a warm hug in the end of their chain. They've gone through many plugins and now it's time just to be held in the hands of our glue compressor and go out there and rule this mix. So let's hear it with and without. As you can hear, very subtle, but there's some compression happening in there. I don't want to ruin my transients, so I leave the attack not that fast, not the highest ratio as well, but you can see there's some compression happening in there, and it is bringing everything together. Trust me. Even if you don't hear it now, I know compression is one of the toughest things to kind of grasp the concept of when you're starting to mix, but the more you use it, the more you get used to it, the more you hear it, the better you use it, for sure. Don't worry, it's gonna be fine. And that's it for the drums, guys. This is how the drums sound all together. This is how the drums sound in the mix. And that's it, guys, and that's how the drums sound in the mix. For the next video, we're gonna do the guitars and the bass, so I would recommend you guys to subscribe to the channel if you wanna see that one. Even if you don't like punk rock, I know you like me, or maybe you don't, but if you like what I do, please press all the things in the world around me that help me, and I see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Like this, angel took my head, angel gave me kiss. Do I look